Yeah, I believe it's recording. And it's 3 o'clock. So let's get started.
Hi.
There we go. All right, are folks in? There we go. Oh, okay. I can't see all the participants. All right, well, we'll get started then. Let's see. Close that screen. So hi, I'm Dr. Stephen Criswell, co-director of Native American Studies at USC Lancaster, and this is the first lecture, the kickoff talk for our Native American Studies Week. This is our 15th annual Native American Studies Week, our first ever virtual Native American Studies Week. We have a number of artists and presenters this week. We centered this week around Native American humor, satire, and parody. And so we're gonna start off. I'm gonna talk today about the trickster figure in Native American culture, as well as other cultures, other civilizations, and so forth. Tomorrow, Chris Olszewski, who is a art professor at the Savannah College of Art and Design and is a Chippewa artist, is going to talk about his work, and his work involves a lot of parody and satire. He'll be talking tomorrow at 3. And on Wednesday at noon, Tom Ferris, who's a Native American artist who also does a lot of humorous and satirical work, he'll be talking about his work on Wednesday. And then on Thursday evening at 7, this should be really interesting. He's going to do an interactive painting session where the audience, those of us who have logged on to Zoom, will, I think, be giving him suggestions and be interacting with him as he creates a work during that time frame. And then on Friday, we have our scheduled lunch and learn. It's not exactly part of our Native American Studies Week theme, but fascinating nonetheless. Rue George Warren, who's doing wonderful work with the Catawba, with his own people. We'll be talking about Catawba foodways. I do want to take a minute to thank our supporters, particularly Oceana Gold or Hell Gold Mine, who have been very supportive of Native American Studies at USC Lancaster. And I also want to thank USC Lancaster, our Dean, Walt Collins, and the Palmetto College of USC for their support. And I want to thank Ashley Lauermore, Katie Scholl, and Elizabeth Streeter for helping get everything organized and up and running. So as I said, I'm going to talk about tricksters today, but before we start, I've asked Catawba storyteller, artist, basket maker, potter, raconteur, spiritual advisor, and friend, Becky Garris, to tell us a couple of stories to sort of set the tone for this, and then I'll give you some dry academic lecture, and then we'll finish up with another story to end on a more entertaining note. So let me go ahead and introduce Becky Garris. Becky.
Tanake, Stephen, and everyone that's here. So I will start out by saying Tanake to everyone. And I'll have to start the stories the way that I was taught to start stories. But unfortunately, I can't get around and move like I'm supposed to when I'm telling stories. So just imagine that I'm doing all of this. So, right into Brink Wikinkonk. A long time ago, the ancient people said, this is how the Dippin' Dot Dot Sook Sook looks the way he does today. There were these 2 brothers, and every morning their chore was to go out and gather the nuts and berries and everything that they need to store for the wintertime. And their Yaksu, their mother, would be in the kitchen and having their sacks ready for them, and they would go out every morning and start gathering everything that they needed to do. So they would go gather them, take them to Yaksu, go back, take them to Yaksu, go back, gather, take them back to Yaksu. And of course, as we know, young people and the not so young people get tired of doing the same monotonous thing over and over again. So they started slowing down to gathering the foods. And Big Brother takes an acorn and chunks it at his little brother. And as they say today, it was on then. So they started chasing each other, running around, splashing in the water, running around the trees. Once in a while, pick up something and chunk it at the other one. And then all of a sudden, the youngest Dippin' Dot Duck Soup stopped. And he started twisting and turning and getting his arms and going to his back. And we all know that even as humans, we have that particular spot that regardless of how we try to dislocate our shoulder, we can't reach that spot. So we have to get someone to help us. And so he looked at his big brother and he said, "Big brother, will you please scratch my back?" And of course, big brothers being big brothers said, "No." He said, "But please, my back really itches and I can't reach that spot. Will you just please, please, please just scratch my back for me?" And of course, big brothers, always being big brothers, says no again. He said, "But please, 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 please." He said, "Okay, if you just stop that squealing, I will scratch your back." So he gently starts scratching his little brother's back, and little brother said, "Curry, curry, that feels good, that feels good." And so, of course, big brother stops. He said, "Well, why did you stop scratching my back?" "Because the itch is still there. Will you pick?" He said, "Don't go there. I will scratch your back for you." So this time when he starts scratching his little brother's back, he brings out his claws and he just rakes them down little brother's back. Start off with little brother and say, "Oh, ow, ouch, you're hurting me." Big brother looks at his little brother's back and he's sorry. "I am so sorry. I put stripes on your back." And of course, little brother is so used to big brother teasing him. He said, "Yeah, right, uh-huh." He said, "No, they really are. And I really am sorry. So please don't tell mama." And he said, "Yeah, right." He said, "No, scamper down to the stream and look, and you will see your reflection in the water." And of course, this was back before you could really see your reflection in the water without all the pollution and everything. So he scampers down there and he looks. And he looks, and sure enough, the stripes are there. But instead of being angry at his big brother, he said, "Well, thank you. That makes me look pretty cool." So big brother looks at little brother and he realizes, little brother does look pretty cool. But then he looks down at the dirt and he kicks it. He said, "Yeah, you look pretty cool, but I don't." And he says, "Yeah, don't I?" And why is it that when little brothers get something big brothers don't have, big brothers want it too? But little brother said, "You know what? We can both look pretty cool. Turn around and I'll put the stripes on your back too." And so big brother turns around, little brother puts the stripes on his back. And that is today why the Catawbas say the Dippin' Dot Duck Soup Soup, or how the chipmunk got his stripes. Hurry, hurry. And I was asked to tell another story. And I've been going back and forth about which one I want to tell. But because we are a matrilineal society, I'm decided to tell about Nya Dapane, first woman. And once again, I will have to stay. A long time ago, the ancient people said, this is about first woman and how the earth became populated. There was this woman. She lived in this cave with all the animals around, and it was perpetual spring all the time. All she had to do was walk outside And she could pick berries. She could pick the leaves to do her clothes out of. They even say that she made her clothes out of the water lily pads. She didn't have to do anything but just look around, see how everything was beautiful, how everything was always growing. She never knew what hunger was. She had friends with all the animals. So one day she was sitting on this rock and she was combing her long hair. And she sees this butterfly. And it's not that she hasn't seen butterflies before, but this butterfly was particularly beautiful. And she got so enthused about watching this butterfly that when the butterfly fluttered away, she got up and she started following it. And it went over hills and around trees and across springs. And then all of a sudden, the butterfly disappears. And she was watching the butterfly so much that she really wasn't watching where she was going. And she turned around and she looks. And she was in this barren place. There was nothing growing. All you saw was rocks and dirt, hills. And then she became afraid because she didn't know how to get back to her lush valley. Plus, she had walked so long, she was so tired that she just laid her head on one of the boulders and she began to cry. Then all of a sudden, she knew something was different. She knew something had happened. And she raises her head and she looks up and she startles because she sees this being that she's never seen before. Sort of looked like her, but definitely wasn't shaped like her. And she really became afraid then. And this being spoke to her. He told her, said, "Do not be afraid, because I am one of the sky people. And I saw that you were in dire straits. And so I broke one of the main cardinal rules that we could always watch after you, but we could not interfere with what you were doing. But I took pity on you. And now that I'm here, I can no longer go back." So they went back to their valley. But then once they were there, they heard this looming voice, a Tatewa, grandfather in the sky. And he says, "Because you have broken the rule, you cannot come back up. You have to stay with her. But also because of the way things are, you will not be able to live in this lush valley. There will be different seasons, and you will have to learn how to harvest and save things so that you can be able to survive in the winter. And you even may have to even take some of your animal friends for meat, but always say thank you for them helping you to survive. But you're also going to have to toil to make sure that you have food to eat as well. But also, you will not have to stay here forever before. You will actually now know what death is. But then once death comes, you will be able to come back up into the sky and to be with us. And you will know when this happens and when your time is getting near. This is where I'm getting a little afraid, because your hair will turn gray at the color of the down of the goose. But then once you come up there, everything will be perfect again. And so that is how first woman met first man. And that is how we are here today in E3. That story is finished as well.
Thank you, Becky.
You're welcome.
So let's talk about tricksters then. The second story there reminds me, there's a story from out west, and I can't recall which tribe it is, but it's a coyote story, and Coyote does away with death. Humanity, he thinks he's helping people because he's tired of people dying and it makes him sad, so he does away with death. But then it becomes a problem because we have too many people and people start starving and there's nowhere for people to live and there's nowhere to go. And Coyote teaches us that in his efforts to avoid death, he was wrong, that we all have to accept it. And it fits in with so many of these trickster stories, as does the chipmunk story, the Dippin' Dot Dot Tsutsu story, and the idea that through trickery, something new is created, something through bad behavior, something good that we can enjoy today exists. So let's talk a little bit about these tricksters. Tricksters are figures from mythology, from religious traditions, spiritual traditions, oral traditions around the world. They're figures who are sometimes difficult for folks in the West to fully understand or appreciate because in the Western world, particularly the Judeo-Christian tradition, and we throw the Muslim tradition there as well, we tend to divide the world into good and evil, right and wrong in a sort of dualistic way. But tricksters are not dualistic. Tricksters are neither good nor evil, or they're both good and evil, or they transcend good and evil. So the concept of the trickster can be difficult for those of us steeped in Western dualistic tradition. But as we go through these slides and talk about it, hopefully we'll gain some appreciation for who the trickster is. Tricksters are as old as mythology itself. They embody the characteristics of the shaman, magical, transcending limits, breaking boundaries, operating on multiple planes of existence, connecting gods to humans. And there are two images here. This one is a rather ancient drawing, a cave painting from a rock painting, actually from the petroglyph from out west. And we see this sort of coyote-like figure here. The other image is from one of the cave paintings in Lascaux, France, the very, very ancient cave drawings, some of the first art created by human beings. And we see this figure here, who's often described as being shamanic in some way, but in some ways he also seems to resemble a trickster figure. You can see his hypersexuality there. You can see some of his other traits. So these figures have been around pretty much as long as humans have. There's a quote from mythologist Joseph Campbell. Campbell is always good at summing things, complex ideas up, summing them up kind of simply. Tricksters relish the disruption of the status quo, turning the ordinary world into chaos with their quick turns of phrase and physical antics. Although they may not change during the course of their journeys, their world and its inhabitants are transformed by their antics. The trickster uses language and ridicule to make characters see the absurdity of the situation and perhaps force a change. Another quote here, this is Paul Radin, or it's French, I think, but Paul Radin, who studied tricksters, wrote the Trickster Study in American Mythology. And he tells us that tricksters are at one and the, tricksters are at one and the same time creator and destroyer, giver and negator, he who dupes others and who is always duped himself. He possesses no values, moral or social, is at the mercy of his passions and appetites. Yet through his actions, all values come into being. The trickster myth is found among the ancient Greeks, the Chinese, the Japanese, the Semitic world. Many of the trickster's traits were perpetuated in the medieval jester and have survived in the Punch and Judy plays and in the clown. Although the clown, if we think about the clown character, the clown character is there to amuse us, but the trickster figure, the trickster's antics involve not just humor, but humor that's used in transformative ways to change culture, to change society, to change beliefs. And we'll see more of this as we go along. Let me finish up these quotes here with a nice quote from folklorist Barbara Babcock Abrams. No figure in literature, oral or written, baffles us quite as much as trickster. He is positively identified with creative powers, often bringing such defining features of culture as fire or basic food, and yet he constantly behaves in the most antisocial manner we can imagine. Although we laugh at him for his troubles and his foolishness and are embarrassed by his promiscuity, his creative cleverness amazes us and keeps alive the possibility of transcending the social restrictions we regularly encounter. The trickster deity breaks the rules of the gods and of nature. In fact, as we talk about tricksters here, I'm using the male pronoun, but tricksters are both male and female or not male and female. The rules of nature, the rules of physics, all of the sort of the way the world works, the way that we think it does, the trickster ignores that. The trickster transcends that. Sometimes the trickster breaks the rules maliciously, but usually, albeit unintentionally, with ultimately positive effects. Often the rule breaking takes the form of tricks or thievery. Tricksters can be cunning or foolish or both, and most of the times both. They're often funny, even when considered sacred or performing important cultural tasks. So, as I mentioned, we don't find a lot of the trickster figure in the Western world, given this dualistic sort of cosmology. But if we go back to pre-Christian times, we can find certain trickster figures. We go back to Greek myth. There's Hermes or Mercury in the Roman tradition, who is a thief, a mischief maker, and a liar. But he's also the messenger of the gods. He's involved in the realm of language. The gods trust him to send messages, even though he is a known liar. And even though he causes trouble, he is a healer. If you think of the symbol for medicine, the rod of Hermes, the rod of Mercury, the staff with the snakes twined around it, that represents him. He's a healer and a trusted messenger. In Greek, not so much Greek myth, but I guess Greek epic tradition, we have Odysseus. Odysseus, who's often referred to as Odysseus wise, but he's also Odysseus the cunning, Odysseus the trick. He's the guy that comes up with the idea of the Trojan horse to trick the Greeks into letting the Trojans into letting the Greek horse come in and the Greek soldiers come out and take Troy. This image here from a Greek vase depicts a scene in the Odyssey where Odysseus and his men have been captured by the Cyclops, Polyphemus, and Odysseus and his men end up getting the Cyclops drunk and getting a sharpened stick and poking his one eye out so they can escape. Earlier, though, the Cyclops had wanted to know who Odysseus was and asked his name, and the Cyclops' father is the god of the sea, Poseidon, who hates Odysseus. So Odysseus knows this, and he's not going to tell the son of his enemy, or the god that really hates him, who he is. So he tells him, "My name's Nobody. That's my name. My name is Nobody." And so when Odysseus and his men poke the Cyclops' eye out and start escaping, the Cyclops comes out and yells to his neighbors, I guess the Cyclops neighbors, and starts yelling, "Nobody's poked my eye out. Nobody has hurt me." And so the neighbors go, "Well, okay, that's fine. Nobody's hurt you. We'll just leave you alone." So it's through that clever use of language that Odysseus and his men escape. If we go to pre-Christian Europe, we find Loki of Norse mythology. Loki's a shapeshifter, sometimes appears as a salmon, as a horse. He switches genders, he lies and steals, but he also helps the gods. He provides them with gifts. He's the one who gives Thor his hammer that everybody associates with Thor, and he often helps human beings. And while the trickster is generally absent, as I said, from European Christian tradition, we can find him in European folklore and folk tales. There's Puss in Boots, there's Reynard the Fox, and of course down there in the right-hand corner is Robin Hood. If you think about Robin Hood, he's a thief, right? He steals from the rich, but he gives to the poor. So he does something we would consider wrong or bad, maybe not evil, but at least bad, but turns it into something good. And of course, he lives in the woods. He lives on the outskirts of forest. He's sort of an outsider, outcast, sort of between civilization and the forest, and all through that realm. We can find tricksters in Asia, in this case in India. This is Krishna. Krishna is a thief, an adulterer, a liar, but he's also the god of love and peace and joy and devotion. He embodies these almost conflicting values. In Africa, we have trickster figures like the god Ishu. Ishu is like many of these tricksters, is a god of language, a spirit of language, of fortune, of roads, of communication, of divination, of telling the future. Just to give you a little feel for Ishu, here's one of my favorite stories about him. Ishu was walking down the road one day wearing a hat that was colored red on one side and blue on the other side. When the farmers in the fields went into the village in the evening, the farmer from one side of the road said, "Did you see that god with a blue hat?" And the others from the other side of the road said, "No, no, he had a red hat on." And they got in a fight. Ishu made it even worse by first walking in one direction and then turning around and turning his hat around too. When these two groups get into a fight and are brought before the king for judgment, the trickster appears and says, "It's my fault. I did it. I meant to do it. Spreading strife is my greatest joy." But Ishu teaches us here that the way we see the world may be dependent on our perspective of where we're coming from. Where we are literally colors the way that we see the road. And we can be so convinced that we see this as it is, we know exactly what it is, but then the trickster turns it around and tells us, "No, what you think is red is blue, and what you think is blue is red." And that's the sort of lesson that the tricksters have for us. When gods like, trickster gods like Ishu were carried over in the minds and the spirits of enslaved Africans, they brought these ideas with them. They brought these gods, some of these gods with them, and over time they lost their divinity and became part of the folk tradition. And so we find figures like Anansi in the West Indies and the Caribbean, Anansi the spider, who is connected back to Anansi, the West African spider god. And like all tricksters, sometimes he's a spider, sometimes he's a man, sometimes he's a spider man. Sometimes he's very strong, sometimes he's very weak. It appears in all sorts of different forms, but he's always getting into trouble, causing trouble, getting himself into trouble. But sometimes we all benefit from the trouble that he gets into. And if we look at American popular culture, probably the most trickstery figure that most of us are familiar with is Bugs Bunny. Now, let's just take a minute and think about Bugs Bunny. Bugs is sometimes, most of the time he's male, but occasionally we see Bugs in drag, right? So he plays both gender roles there, or two different gender roles. He has the ability to tie a shotgun into a bow tie, and yet he runs from the shotgun. Clearly the shotgun will kill him. His rabbit hole is like something out of Harry Potter. It's a palace underneath. He doesn't even obey the laws of time and space. He tells us when he runs off a cliff and hangs in the air that he's defying the law of gravity, but that he never studied law. He's probably the best example of a trickster because, if you're Elmer Fudd, if you're trying to hunt a rabbit for food, and this rabbit is doing all sorts of terrible things to you, who's the bad guy in that? I mean, yeah, Elmer wants to kill him, but he may be killing him for food, and we can't blame him for that. And yet here's Bugs just tormenting Yosemite Sam and Elmer Fudd and the others. It may be that Bugs Bunny finds his origin in the Brer Rabbit stories that we often associate with African-American culture, and particularly with the white writer Joel Chandler Harris. If you're familiar at all with the Brer Rabbit stories, it's probably through the Uncle Remus stories of Joel Chandler Harris. And if you're old enough, you remember the film Song of the South, which rightly is not out there for mass viewing, but the stories that it told, I remember as a child being very impactful, very, very captivating stories. And we often associate Brer Rabbit with African-American tradition, but there's an interesting thing here. There doesn't really seem to be a rabbit trickster in West Africa, but there is a rabbit trickster in Native American cultures. And Jay Vest at UNC Pembroke has written about the native origins of Brer Rabbit and argues that Brer Rabbit comes out of a native tradition. I tend to think what happened there is you had enslaved Africans and their descendants who were encountering Native Americans, particularly in the Southeast, Native Americans who had stories about a trickster rabbit, African Americans who had stories about tricksters, and that over time maybe these blended together because there are a number of Brer Rabbit stories. You can find their antecedents in West Africa, but you can also find parallels in Native American culture as well. So it seems like this rabbit figure is very much, this Brer Rabbit figure is very much an American trickster coming out of two diverse traditions. But let's look a little closer then at Native American tricksters. In the Pacific Northwest, we have the character, the figure of Raven. And a lot of times it's sort of obvious why these animals are associated with tricksters. I mean, ravens, like crows and other birds of that sort, they are tricky animals. They're very clever, they're very smart, they're mischief makers, they're thieves, they get into trouble. Raven in the stories from the Pacific Northwest is a troublemaker, but he also does things for the good. He steals the sun and moon from a chief who's keeping them all for himself. He steals them and brings them back so that everyone can enjoy them again. In the mythologies of the Pacific Northwestern people, Raven creates the world, but he's also a glutton and he's a troublemaker. In the American Southwest, we have the Kokopelli figure, who has become much more popular, much more prominent, sort of a figure of popular culture now. You can see bumper stickers and artwork and paintings and so forth that have this figure of the flute-playing trickster Kokopelli. He's from the Southwest. He's a flute player, just like Krishna is, from the Asian tradition. He presides over fertility and music. His flute chases away winter and brings spring, but he also seduces maidens with it as well, with his flute playing. And of course, there's the phallic image of the flute as well, sort of standing in for his male sexuality. He's an ancient Pueblo deity. His image can be dated back over thousands of years. If you go look at the image there in the left-hand corner, it's from prehistoric rock art from southeastern Arizona. That's probably thousands of years old, and very similar to the picture on the right-hand corner, which is from popular culture. Here it's a souvenir poster, a wanted poster for Kokopelli, and you can read the various crimes he's being accused of on this poster. So Kokopelli is out in the Southwest. If we go into the plains and then a little further north among the Lakota and other groups, we find Iktomi the spider, again, another spider figure, similar to the West Caribbean, West Indian spider Nancy. So the Lakota have this character Iktomi, who's a spider, but also a god, a spirit, and again, very much a trickster. Let's look at this. Here's a quote about Iktomi. Iktomi is a spider fairy. He wears brown deerskin leggings with long, soft fringes on either side and tiny beaded moccasins on his feet. His long black hair is parted in the middle and wrapped with red bands. Each brown braid hangs over a small brown ear and falls forward over his shoulders. He even paints his funny face with red and yellow and draws big black rings around his eyes. He wears a deerskin jacket with bright colored beads sewed tightly on it. Iktomi dresses like a real Dakota brave. In truth, his paint and deerskins are the best part of him, if ever dressed as part of a man or a fairy. Iktomi is a wily fellow. His hands are always kept in mischief. He prefers to spread a snare rather than to earn the smallest thing with honest hunting. He traps, he tricks. Why? He laughs outright with wide open mouth when some simple folk are caught in a trap and held fast. So when you try to envision this, there's the logic of the trickster, which is sort of the illogic of the trickster. If you try to picture this figure, a tiny spider who wears a deerskin jacket, who has braids and long hair, but also spins a web, and it becomes nearly impossible to imagine it with just regular rational thought. In the Midwest, there's this figure who, among Midwestern tribes and into Canada, we have this figure who goes by different names, Nanabush, Manabozho, Glooskap, who is the great hare, the great rabbit. In this prehistoric image here, we see him with his giant ears sticking up, sort of half human, half rabbit figure. And we find him among these tribes in the Great Lakes regions and into Canada on this side of the border in the northern Midwest. And again, like other tricksters, Manabozho, Glooskap, Nanabush is both a creator and a troublemaker. Here's a story that is sort of a Noah story, but unlike Noah, Manabozho isn't quite, he isn't saving every animal, he's not saving every human, but he saves us all from the flood eventually. Many, many years ago, there was a terrible flood. The waters rose higher and higher, and finally Manabozho was forced to look for shelter on higher ground. He remembered a high hill he knew and took refuge there. Eventually the waters reached the spot where he sat. Right about this time, Manabozho finally began to get worried. He called to all the animal brothers and said, "We must work together. If we don't do something now, there will be no earth left." The animals gathered together, swimming around the tree where Manabozho sat. One by one, Manabozho told each one, the duck, the beaver, and all the other animals, to dive into the water and see how deep it was. And each took his turn, but he never returned. You see, they drowned. Eventually, a muskrat came swimming along. Manabozho stopped him and asked, "Will you do me a favor?" "Certainly," replied the muskrat. "What is that?" "Will you go down to the bottom and get some earth?" Asked Manabozho. The muskrat went down and was gone for a long time. Finally, his body floated up to the surface. Manabozho, using a branch, pulled him out of the water. The muskrat looked dead. Manabozho blew on him until he came to life. When he opened the muskrat's paw, he found a few grains of sand. When Manabozho threw these on the water, earth appeared. Manabozho kept working, and the earth became bigger and bigger. The first animal that Manabozho or Glooskap created was a beaver. It wasn't any old beaver that was large as a whale. It made a dam so big it flooded the land from horizon to horizon. When Glooskap finally caught the animal, he tapped it on the back once again and shrunk it to a smaller size. So he manages to bring earth back to the waters, or hold back the waters and bring earth back. But then once he's done that, he makes this giant animal who then blocks up the water again. So the trickster solves the problem, but then creates the problem again by creating this giant beaver that blocks the water up again, and he has to come back and undo everything that he's done before. Probably the best known Native American, or the best known trickster from Native American culture is Coyote of the American Plains and the Plateaus of the Western regions. Again, if you've seen a coyote, you know how they look like they're up to something. They look tricky, they look suspicious and nervous. They're always looking over their shoulder. A number of Native tribes have stories about, why this is, why Coyote is running from trouble all the time. He's always looking over his shoulder to keep an eye on things. Coyote is selfish, he's a troublemaker, but at times he can also be a hero. In one short story here, Coyote takes water from the frog people because it's not right that one people have all the water. That Coyote shares. Coyote is benevolent, but at other times Coyote is very, very selfish, very self-centered, and very dangerous in some ways. But there is always a lesson to be learned from his antics. And if we look in other Southwestern Native tribes, we see a figure that's not a character from folklore or a character from mythology or religion, but individual people who play a certain role in rituals among certain Southwestern tribes, the Heyoka, or the sacred clown. These are members of the community who in religious ceremonies paint themselves up, as you see in the picture here, and paint themselves up to look like trickster figures from the stories, from the mythology, from the religious stories. They interrupt rituals. They come in and they knock things over, and they taunt the audience, and they bother the priests, and they stir up trouble, and they get involved in all sorts of antics. And it's a way probably of shaking things up so that those who are involved in the ritual pay attention to the ritual. They don't just go through it, memorizing the songs, memorizing the words and hymns and praise songs, just going through the motions of the rituals. I mean, you imagine if you're in church one Sunday and some crazy looking figure comes in and starts spilling the holy water everywhere and pushing the priest around and jumping up and down on the altar and that sort of thing, you're going to pay attention. It's going to get your attention. And these antics, in a way, they bring the people back to the importance of the ritual, the importance of what it is they're doing as a community. And this gets driven home by these clowns, these tricksters coming in and disrupting things so that people remember why it's important that they're doing these rituals and what it is that's important about these rituals. Just a few final thoughts here about trickster figures. In mythology, tricksters, and in ritual and the sacred clown, the tricksters force us to examine our own doubts, fears, limitations, and boundaries. They encourage us to laugh in the face of despair and remain modest in midst of victory. They serve as negative examples of pride and greed and positive examples of kindness and creativity. They warn us of chaos when we become too complacent, and they keep us from taking ourselves and our authorities, including the gods, too seriously. They push the boundaries so that societies might create boundaries. They affirm society's norms by breaking them. They represent good in those we label as bad, and they represent good in those that we label bad, and bad in those that we see as good. They get away with what we cannot do, and they often do what we dare not even think of doing. But they also do things that we know better than to do. They bring ruin on themselves by behaving in ways that we would never dream of, and we laugh at their excess, but we admire their creativity and ingenuity. In many ways, the trickster represents the creative, imaginative troublemaker. in some ways, the trickster is an artist in the way that he or she functions in the midst of the legends and the traditions and the cultures around the world by creating something out of nothing, by destroying and then recreating, by stirring up trouble and breaking boundaries only to reconstruct those boundaries in new ways. And I want to finish here with a line from a poem by Leslie Marmon Silko, labeled a Laguna Coyote story for the poet Simon Ortiz. One year, the politicians got fancy at Laguna. They went door to door with hams and turkeys, and they gave them to anyone who promised to vote for them. On election day, all the people stayed home and ate turkey and laughed. It seemed like a good poem for as we maybe continue or finish up this election season. But hopefully, this has helped gain a little, shed a little light on the trickster figure, an important figure in Native American culture, Native American mythology. And I think as we see Chris and Tom, our artists this week, talking and displaying their work, we can see that trickster tradition is alive and well in 21st century Native. So thank you for that. And to wrap things up, I'm going to turn back over to Becky and ask her to give us one more story.
Thank you, Stephen. As you kept going through, I kept going through my mind which one I was going to tell, one about flood, maybe about something else, and then I'm going to go in an entirely different area so that we can sort of add different things to it. Once again, Arit in Spring Wakinkatonk. A long time ago, the ancient people said, this is how Ugni came to be. This Yaksu and her Kari were out gathering herbs for her medicines and different things. And she always told her Kari to stay close by. But all of a sudden, this mist started falling. And she got very sleepy. So she told her son, she said, all of a sudden, I'm very sleepy. So I'm going to lean against this tree and take a nap. Now you make sure you stay very close. So she does. Then she wakes up after a while. She doesn't realize how long she has actually slept, but she looks around and she cannot see her Kari. And she starts saying, Karina, Tayade. She listens. She hears nothing. Karina, Tayade. Still again, nothing. Now she's getting very concerned and she's getting louder. Karina, Tayade. My son, where are you? And she can't find him, even though she's looking around. And then she hears this kuching. She looks up and she sees this Hawakche kuching on the branches. And this blackbird hops down and he tells her, if you have some cornbread and you give me some, I will tell you where your son is. So she looks into her pouches and she brings out the cornbread and she gives it to him. And he eats it. And he said, Kari, good. Ugni, the witch woman, has taken your son. And if you can give me some more of your cornbread, I will tell you how you can get to him. So of course she reaches into her pouch and she gives him the rest of the cornbread. He eats it up and he takes flight and he tells her, now follow me. And so she does. And they come to this riverbank. And he said, there is a canoe hid up under this brush. And if you paddle across the river and walk a ways, you will find your son. So she does. But the bird flies across with her too. And he says, okay, now you're going to have to be very careful because she is very powerful. And she says, well, thank you. She said, but before you fly away, I'd like to do something for you. So she reaches back in into her pouch and she brings out her paint rocks. And she paints the blackbird's head red. And then she paints his breast white. And that's how I'll say the Catawbas say the red-headed woodpecker was created. And so the woodpecker flies off. And so she starts walking and looking, and she comes across this dilapidated cabin. And she sneaks up to it and she looks through the broken window. And sure enough, there was her son. He looked haggard and hungry and dirty, but he also saw the witch woman there too. So she gave her son the signal that they had always had whenever they get separated. And she says, "Bop, whoop, bop, whoop, bop, whoop." So her son knew that she was outside and was very close. And he tells Ugni, "I'm going to go see if I can get us a witty-boye. So will you please give me the bow and arrow?" And she says, "All right, you lazy boy. Here's the bow, one arrow. And your aim better be true." So he goes out and he goes and he sees his mother. And she says, "Now we're going to have to run very fast once we get her away from here." He said, "Well, you hide here until I come back." So she hides. And he goes into the woods and he sees this witty-boye. And he takes his bow and his arrow. And sure enough, his aim was true. And he shoots and the deer falls dead. And as he was taught, he went over and thanked the deer for giving his life for him. But he also brought out these leather tongs that he had, straps that he had brought with him. But he also took the arrow out from the deer and he puts slits into the leather and he wraps it up and he goes back and tells Ugni, "Ugni, my aim was true and there's a deer in the woods, but he's too heavy and I can't carry him. So you're going to have to go get him." She said, "All right, you lazy boy, where is it?" So she tells him. And so she takes off and go gets the deer. And as she's heaving up on her shoulders and she starts walking, where he had put the slits, the leather started stretching. And she would have to stop every once in a while to readjust the weight of the deer. So while she was doing this, the young boy goes back and finds his mother and they start running to go back to where the canoe is. But they forget that Ugni is a witch woman and she has very keen hearing and she can see. So she drops the deer and starts chasing after the mother and her son. And she is so fleet of foot that she was soon catching up to them. And the mother cries out to Wahire, he who never dies, "Please help us." And so Wahire takes pity upon her and he sends down the sky rope. And he said, "Grab a hold of this and come back and you will come up into the sky." So they do. And as it's going back up, the witch woman gets close to them and she jumps up and she catches the very tip end of the sky rope. And so she's climbing faster and faster. And once again, the mother cries out to Wahire to please help them because she is catching up with them. And so he takes his hand and he goes, "Phew," and he turns the mother and her son into a big cloud and a little cloud. But he also takes his hand and he breaks the sky rope. And the Ugni starts falling faster and faster and faster until she bursts into a big ball of fire. And that's why I always say today, when you see the little cloud and the big cloud close together, that is still the mother and her young son being protected from Ugni. But whenever you see this big ball of fire falling through the sky, that is how Ugni, the comet, was created. Wahire. It is finished. Yes.
Thank you, Becky. So I think we have a few minutes for questions or comments, if anybody has any.
Stephen, Becky, thank you for your presentation. We have had a few comments in the chat, and we do have a question from Jim. Does the second story that Becky told predate the arrival of the Europeans? The parallels with the Garden of Eden are obvious. Can anyone speak to the comparisons of groups who may have similar stories but have had no contact with each other?
That was always told. That story has been passed down probably thousands of years, even before Christianity came along. It's their way of explaining how we got here.
Yeah, I mean, it's the parallels in myths and legends and tales from around the world. It's something that scholars have debated about, whether there are Earth stories that spread out, or if some, for whatever reason, they pop up in different places. And it may have something to do with the way our minds work, the way our brains work. It's partly the influences and interaction with others. And I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if that story has changed since European contact, but we had to figure the change was for a purpose and for a reason, and something that the storytellers found in it that maybe they adjusted here, or changed here, or added here. But the essential story, stays the same. But it's people like stories, and people share stories and incorporate them into their own cultures if they have, if they fit, if there's something in that story that works with their cosmology, with their view of the world. So I don't know. I mean, it's an old story though.
Anyone else has any questions? Oh,
I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, if anyone has any questions, submit them through the chat. We'll be glad to forward them to Stephen and Becky. Stephen, go ahead.
Yeah, well, yeah, like the flood story. I was just looking at the chat there. The flood stories. I mean, you on the one hand, the end of the world by water. If your world is your village, if your world is a small area and it's flooded, and that happens. I mean, it happened to the Catawbas on a regular basis. That's the end of your world. So the world has been destroyed. And I think that's just human nature. As human beings, we're on the lookout for floods and fires and pandemics and oligarchs and whatever it is we have to worry about. Yeah, it's diffusion versus convergence, and I've never held to. So the question is, or the statement is, it's a question of diffusion versus convergence, independent invention, but because many distinct human societies have similar concerns, many stories have parallels despite having no direct contact. That's from Sarah Rich. Yeah, and I think that's it. It's the human experience, and it's. As human beings, we take our experiences and turn them into stories, sometimes mythologizing them, but sharing them. And we experience, so stories of the coming of death. All human beings, by virtue of being human, you're aware of your mortality, and so it's not surprising that every culture, or just about every culture, would have a story explaining why death comes, because it's as a child you ask that question, why do people have to die? And so your culture gives you a story to explain this phenomenon. That's probably part of it. Any other questions? Let's see.
Stephen?
Yeah.
Can I chime in a second too?
You can always
I noticed, yeah, I do, don't I? I noticed a thread here too that say these cultures have no contact. I don't like, it's very often we're finding now of trade networks that go forever, of Indian trading paths that went on for long, long ways.
Yeah.
And I think we make an assumption lots of times, and I think a lot of the great researchers of the past did, that because these people live 2,000 miles from each other, they would have no contact.
Yeah.
But we're finding out, I know Chris Judge was showing me last year, we had something from Michigan that traveled all the way far, far south. So I don't think no contact is a valid point lots of times. I think there probably was contacts. Maybe one storyteller or one folklorist walked 1,000 miles, made it back 1,000 miles later, a couple of years. And so I think we have to take the no contact with a grain of salt lots of times.
Yeah.
Because we don't really know. We're making an assumption.
Well, I mean, Becky has told the story, I think what your grandfather told you about the migration of the people who became Catawba. And yeah, I tell my students, you know, there wasn't anything on TV, there wasn't anything else to do. You might as well just take a walk. You just keep walking. And you know, we in recent history, we have the stories of Catawba potters walking from you know, outside of Rock Hill to Gastonia. That's a long walk. But you know, I think ancient people probably walked a lot more than we think about today, and weren't, you know, leaving a set home to go somewhere. They just were on the move. And that, Becky, you know,
Yeah, I was going to say, being Catawba, we had contact with people that were here. Whenever we think about contact, we don't think in the realms of we didn't have contact with each other here. We talk about pre-contact of the Europeans. So, you know.
yeah, and then even afterwards, sort of was referring
Yeah.
to the Brer Rabbit stories, is it's often sort of the way we think about the past. And I know myself as a youngster, when I heard about plantations, I thought of them pretty much like penitentiaries. Like if you were enslaved on a plantation, you were on that plantation. You didn't go anywhere. You never left. But we know that you know, that certain, if you weren't enslaved as a household servant, and you were working in the field and you lived off in the slave quarters, you went out in the woods, you went out and you fished and even hunted at times. You moved around a little bit more than we think about. And there were native people who were enslaved, so they were side by side with people of African descent. And then even after it became primarily enslavement of Africans, African Americans, these folks were out in the woods encountering their native neighbors who were also out hunting and fishing. And so, you know, you got to figure that there's, you know, it happens today. I mean, you hang out with somebody, you meet somebody, you start swapping stories, and you go, oh, that reminds me of a story I heard. And then the other person, oh, that reminds me of this story. And they just start getting all mixed up over time because, you know, as human beings, we're storytellers. Anything else? Ta-da. Any other questions? Well, all right, it's right at 4 o'clock. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in, I guess, is how this works. And I encourage you to join us tomorrow at 3 o'clock for Chris. And I'm working on his last name, Olszewski. I'm pretty sure it's Olszewski. But he's very, very talented, very entertaining. And I think you'll enjoy his talk very much. And hopefully we can have all the technology bugs worked out and have everything working smoothly. So again, thank you very much for participating. And if you'd like to learn more about the Catawba Indians, I would encourage you to visit the Catawba Cultural Center, go to their various websites and so forth. And
Just FYI, we're in the process of renovating everything, and they won't open up back up until the first of the year.
yeah, make a list of places to go when we can.
Yeah. Yes.
The Catawba Cultural Center, the Native American Studies Center.
Yes.
At the very least.
Yes.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Kate, everyone.
Adios. Later.
Later. Yes. That's Kate.
Okay.